Today, we're going to fundamentally shift how you think about your AI strategy. Right now, the entire tech world is absolutely obsessed with picking the one winning AI model. But what if I told you that trying to pick a winner is, well, entirely the wrong approach? We need to move away from that gamble. Instead, we're going to look at how to build an architecture of optionality. Because your real, durable advantage isn't going to be which model you choose today, but how easily you can change your mind tomorrow.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with going beyond the AI binary, then look at the two risk surfaces, dive into strategic routing and cost, reframe sovereignty as segmentation, and finally, bring it all together with the governed model portfolio. Let's redefine what it actually means to control your AI. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Beyond the AI Binary, and why raw quality is no longer decisive. We really need to tackle the most exhausted debate in enterprise tech right now.
If you're an enterprise leader, a developer, or sitting on a board, you've probably spent countless hours agonizing over this exact question. Do we bet on an open-weight model or a closed, rented frontier model? It feels like the biggest decision you have to make, right?
Honestly, it's completely the wrong question. This whole debate is a myth because capability convergence has made this binary totally obsolete. The leading open-weight models now trail the absolute cutting-edge rented frontier models by just 6 to 12 months. They're practically neck and neck on most benchmarks. So when raw quality stops being the decisive factor, the whole best model narrative just completely falls apart.
Because when quality converges, the real existential threat to your business becomes something called agentic lock-in. Now, this redefines the concept of lock-in entirely. It used to be that lock-in was just a database or an endpoint. But in the agentic era, it's the workflow itself. When your AI agents accumulate non-portable memory, deep tool configurations, and highly specific organizational context, migrating those workflows is no longer as simple as just swapping an API key. You become dangerously dependent on that provider.
And the data on this is wild. Look at the Zapier survey of enterprise users. A staggering 47% of enterprises say a key business function would completely die if their primary AI provider went dark. Another 47% would face massive disruption. Only 6%, yeah, literally just 6%, said they could switch providers cleanly without disruption. The switching tax is enormous, which means betting your company on a single vendor's roadmap is a massive vulnerability.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, the two risk surfaces. We're talking about relocating, not removing risk. If we aren't choosing models based purely on raw quality anymore, we have to look at how we manage risk across our entire architecture.
You'll often hear people argue for one model type because they think it's somehow safer. But neither rented frontier models nor open-weight models actually remove risk, they just relocate it. If you use a rented frontier model, you're concentrating all your risk in that vendor relationship. Pricing changes, outages, shifting terms of service. On the flip side, open-weight models don't magically eliminate risk either. They transfer it directly to you, the operator. You are now the one managing the infrastructure, the security, the whole shebang.
So the crucial point you have to remember is this. Control isn't just freedom. Control is accountability. Every single capability you gain with open source arrives firmly attached to a new responsibility that you now own. Take Hugging Face, for example. They recently did a single supply chain sweep and found 100 malicious models, including a fake OpenAI release with 250,000 downloads that was just delivering malware. If you self-host, catching that kind of stuff is entirely on you.
And this extends really deeply into regulation, too. As the EU AI Act highlights, integrating an open model into a high-risk product can actually transfer full provider obligations directly to your company. Remember this phrase, openness is a distribution property, not a compliance shield. Never make the mistake of equating an open-weight model with automatic safety or compliance.
Let's move on to Section 3, Strategic Routing and Cost. It's time to unmask the true price of AI. Because if open models carry all this heavy compliance and operational weight, how do we actually evaluate what they cost?
Well, the dominant narrative right now is that open source is free. But that narrative is dangerously incomplete. It completely ignores the $300,000 to $600,000 a year in engineering overhead required to actually run and maintain those open-weight models. It isn't free, it just moves the bill from token charges right over to human payroll.
This means token pricing is literally just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the waterline sits the fully loaded TCO, or total cost of ownership. You have to use this metric instead of just comparing GPU or token prices. Fully loaded TCO factors in your infrastructure, the MLOps labor we just talked about, security,
compliance monitoring, deployment time, and your exit costs. This is really the only mature way to evaluate your AI expenditure.
To put that into perspective, let's look at a concrete example. While API costs scale linearly, which often results in bills that brutally compound when you move from a pilot to full production, self-hosting carries a largely fixed cost. The break-even point sits roughly around 10 to 30 million tokens per day. For a mid-sized SaaS doing 50 million tokens a day, the Frontier API costs about $18,750 a month, while the self-hosted average is around $11,200. At this volume, self-hosting makes total sense, but below that volume, the API wins every time.
To manage these really complex cost dynamics, we introduce a critical piece of architecture, the routing layer. Think of this as your AI traffic controller. It turns your model sourcing decision from a massive, one-time company-wide bet into a dynamic per-request policy. And here's the key takeaway. The routing layer is strategic infrastructure. It's not just a free optimization layer, it requires real orchestration.
Here is exactly how it works in practice. This infrastructure evaluates every single prompt as it comes in. First, it evaluates the sensitivity of the request. Second, it assesses the task difficulty. And third, it routes that request to the cheapest adequate intelligence. I mean, why pay top-tier frontier prices for commodity work, right? You use this routing layer to reserve your expensive, heavy-duty Frontier Express lane only for the absolute hardest tasks.
Walmart's Code Puppy is kind of the canonical example of this in action. They completely refuse the open versus closed binary. Their system dynamically switches between GPT, Claude, and Gemini on a per-request basis. By intelligently routing these requests, they completely avoid the single model overpayment tax. And just to highlight how big of a deal that is, organizations using just one model for all their tasks generally overpay by 40 to 85% compared to those using intelligent routing.
All right, moving to Section 4, Sovereignty as Segmentation. Insurance, not ideology. This is the final major complication in our architecture: geopolitical and regulatory constraints.
Sovereignty should never be a rigid ideology that you just blanket apply to your entire business. When you look at typical enterprise workloads, only about a third actually requires sovereign deployments due to strict regulations or extreme sensitivity. The other 67%, they can be global or hybrid. Sovereignty is simply a segmentation variable. Open-weight models function beautifully here as a sovereign fallback, an absolute insurance policy that cannot be revoked, repriced, or geo-restricted. But applying it to everything just skyrockets your costs and cuts off your access to the best frontier capabilities.
We've debunked the binary, we've mapped the real risk surfaces, implemented routing for cost control, and segmented for sovereignty. That brings us to Section 5, the governed model portfolio, the winning strategy.
The only mature board-level answer to generative AI procurement is building a governed model portfolio. It's a controlled architecture that intelligently mixes and matches all your options. For the bleeding edge, you use proprietary APIs. For bulk processing, you swap in hosted open-weight models. And for your most sensitive, highly regulated data, you leverage self-hosted and sovereign deployments. By diversifying your model sourcing like this, no single vendor failure, sudden price shock, or regulatory change is ever going to be fatal to your business.
If you take away just one single thought from this entire explainer, let it be this: model sourcing is now an architecture of optionality, not a procurement choice. Your durable long-term advantage is not owning the absolute best model today, it's owning an architecture that allows you to change your mind cheaply and quickly tomorrow, as prices, capabilities, and regulations inevitably shift. The real advantage is your architecture, not your allegiance.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Stop betting your company's continuity on a single vendor's roadmap. Look closely at your own systems and ask yourself this before your very next AI deployment: is your AI architecture built for true optionality, or are you just renting your future?